Hey guys, Dr. Mike Israetel here for Renaissance Plus. Today's topic is unhealthy body fat levels. More particularly, there's a lot of talk. I'm sure you read some articles online, seen some videos, heard people talk at the gym about what are unhealthy body fat levels. And you kind of get the impression that there's definitely such a thing as too high. Not quite sure on the numbers. People push a lot of numbers around. And there are also impressions that there's such a thing as too low. So we're going to go in a little bit deeper of an examination today to figure out if there is a too high, if there is a too low, what those numbers are for both males and females because they are different, and see kind of why the reasons are for what they are and what to do about it particularly. So they're different for females, these numbers, right? Different for females, different for males. Because fundamentally, females carry extra body fat for the support of their secondary and primary reproductive organs and reproductive capacities. Females have reproductive fat around their gynoid region, the hip region. They have breasts that are made primarily of fat, and those structures are designed to have body fat in them. So the body fat that is there is not health impairing whatsoever. It is, as a matter of fact, health imparting. So we're going to learn a little bit that females carry a bit higher body fat percentage than men, and there's nothing absolutely wrong with that. So the first thing I have to say is kind of a prequel to this, a big public service announcement. If you happen to be female and you're watching this, or if you're male and you coach other females, you're friends with them, etc., remember that when males say, hey, I got my body fat done and it was this, and people at the gym go, oh, that's really cool. What's yours, Cindy? Or what's yours, Laura? And Cindy and Laura look at each other and they go, holy crap. And they know their number. Maybe they got it done last week. They got a DEXA scan or skin fold or something like that. And they know it's way higher. And they start to compare themselves with the males. Because a lot of the females that come to seek our support and our guidance at Renaissance, they'll say, well, I want to be this body fat. And we go, well, holy crap, that's really low. Where did you get this number? And they're like, well, that's what my gym members talk about as being good, as being lean, as being healthy. And all of a sudden we're like, these males or females? Like, well, they're males, but there are no buts. It's a completely different issue. Right? As a female, you don't seek to be, 230 pounds with abs because mostly that's out of the reach for females given their hormones and genetics and other factors. But for some reason, females seem to think that, oh, well, I'm just going to get just as lean as males. In the short term, that's actually possible. We'll talk about that later. But in the long term, especially for healthy, sustainable levels, those are different values. So let's just get to the values really quick. First, what is too high? Too high means that your chances of experiencing long-term health degradation start to go up to unfriendly numbers, to numbers that to a medical professional would not be favorable to a long life full of fundamentally good health. Now, of course, we're going to give you exact values, but it's a spectrum range, and we'll talk about what that means in a bit. So this isn't like if you're 1% below this number, you're golden. If you're 1% above, imminent death. It's just a very general number to keep in mind that if you stay on the south side of this number on the low end, you're probably in the clear and fundamentally can focus on a lot of other things about your health versus your body fat. If you're significantly, especially significantly above these values we're about to give, significantly means you're 5% or more above them, then it's probably a good idea to take a look at your body composition, at your level of body fat, and work on that as a primary, secondary, or tertiary goal before you move on to other goals. It's one of those situations when a patient presents to a medical professional or a client to a trainer or something of that nature, or a client to an RP coach, and they say, I want to be healthy. If we look at body fat and it's underneath that healthy range, we say, okay, well, let's take a look at your activity levels. Let's take a look at the kind of training you're doing. Let's take a look at the quality of your diet, so you're getting all of your nutrients, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to worry about your body fat much. That's not the biggest route to health. It doesn't pay huge dividends when it's already low, or already in the lower range. But if it's in the higher range, especially way into the higher range, it gives us the best bang for the buck in terms of health to start focusing on that first. I'll put another analogy. If you have a car and you want to make it go faster, we can say that body fat is the kind of tires you have in your car. If you have fundamentally good tires, they're not super slick race tires or super cool winter tires that don't slip, but they're good tires, They're relatively new. They've been traded off front to back. They've been rotated. If we want to make our car faster, maybe we got to work on the engine. Maybe we got to work on the electronics. Maybe we got to work on the aerodynamics. But the tires are fundamentally good if they're within that normal range. Now, if your tire situation is one in which you're riding on a spare tire on one side, another tire is completely flat, and one tire is on its way to being flat, and one tire is overpumped, the tire situation is something we need to look at first before we give you a bigger engine to make you go fast enough just to crash the car because of tire instability. So put another way, we're going to make sure that if our body fat is definitely in the high-end range, it receives priority in an intervention nutritionally and for training that's designed to enhance health. But if your body fat's within, comfortably especially, within the normal range or within the healthy range, it might not be your first concern and probably shouldn't be for enhanced health. So, numbers. Very general, remember, super rough estimates, plus or minus 5% on these for sure. For males, anytime we see males under most conditions get above 25% fat, like I just stated, becomes a pretty big concern. Fat reduction becomes a pretty big priority. Now, does that mean that above 20% and you're in the clear that you won't have any health benefits being above 20%? If you go below, let's say you're 22%, are you just golden? And if you go to 16, are you just not going to see any health benefits? No, of course not. You'll see plenty of health benefits from 22 to 16 from that kind of drop. But if you're below about 25% as a male, high body fat level isn't probably the number one thing we're worried about with you. We're not worried at all, but it's probably not the number one thing that you should be concerned with altering if you want best health. So for example, if we have an individual that is 22% body fat, but accomplishes this for a completely sedentary lifestyle, and in that case, we're not so worried about the body fat. That's not really the problem. So we might not even address eating all that much because fundamentally eating seems to reflect a decent level of body fat. But we might really try to get that individual to exert more work effort, go and have better workouts in the gym, as that will forget about effects on body fat. Even if that doesn't change, will have much better effects. So 25% is kind of our rough estimate there. Anything much above 25%, starting to be a priority for body fat loss. So if you're male and you're at 30%, it should definitely be a high priority in your fitness goals, in your health goals, to get that number below the 25 range. Right? If you're way below, and we'll address this in a bit, maybe it's not number one priority. For females, that number is actually about 35%. So we see a 10% discrepancy across most of these values for males and females. So 35% plus for females. If you're female and you're 37, 40% fat, yes, there are 50 different goals you can have for your health, but a reduction of body fat in a truly objective analysis is going to be a priority. If you're in the low 30s, maybe other things such as physical activity, such as the quality of your diet, such as the amount of muscle mass you're carrying, may actually be more important for your health and pay bigger dividends. So 35% is that number for females. And again, it doesn't mean that you're completely safe from all harm at 34. It doesn't mean that at 36% disaster is going to be imminent. But it does mean that they give us these very general values so that you can have two lines of thinking. It's just a priority structure. When you get your body fat done next time, if it's a good, reliable method, usually DEXA, skin fold calipers, sometimes the BIA device, but that's usually not that great. The bodyfat is a good one, where you sit in the air chamber and it measures your volume. So if you get your body fat, and let's say you're male and you're at 19%, or you're a female and you're at, 29%, fundamentally, if your number one priority is your health, you're plenty lean to be in very good health. If you come to a medical professional, the first thing he or she is probably not going to say is that you need to get much leaner and lose a whole lot of weight. But if you have the same tests and you're a male and you say test at 29%, you're a female and you test at 39 or 40%, getting lean should be considered as a big part of what you can do to enhance your health. Forget about appearance. Appearance for sure. Health definitely now is a concern. So those numbers are good ones to keep in mind. Question: Why? So high body fats are seemingly conducive to poor health. Why is that the case? Well, a couple of reasons. One, high levels of body fat produce a lot of unfortunate blood work profiles that are themselves caused and are correlated with poor health outcomes. Serum cholesterol tends to reflect more bad cholesterol and less good cholesterol the higher body fat someone has. There's probably a cause and effect there to some extent, that high body fats actually cause those levels. Triglyceride levels seem to be off, and a variety of other levels of blood work that are not indicative of good health. And when body fat levels are reduced, good health blood work is much higher in probability. Just having extra fat tissue, having extra weight, and the fat tissue itself seems to put an extra stress on organs. It seems to tax the organs all the way into the bones because they have to carry the extra weight around. So there is an organ taxation process with excess body fat. It is higher than with excess muscle mass. So there's that consideration. And you can tell all of this stuff starts to sum up over a long term. There are hormonal effects, particularly with effects sometimes on testosterone and estrogen. High fat body fat levels tend to convert more estrogen to testosterone than is optimal. And in a high estrogenic environment, that actually just rewards more fat building to some extent. That's a relatively small concern compared to the effects on insulin, particularly with insulin resistance. Body fat levels are so causative of a development of insulin resistance, which is, by the way, pre-diabetes or pre-type 2 diabetes, which eventually, if you get, is a real bad health concern. It is so causative of this that in rat studies in which they want to induce pre-diabetic state, they actually just make the rats fatter by any means that they can. So they usually restrict their physical activity and actually feed them more fats. You would think they'd feed them more carbohydrate, which is a straight line to diabetes, you would think. But they actually oftentimes overfeed them just saturated fats. Why? Because they're cheap and easy to eat. The rats love them. And the rats' excess body fat gain from those excess saturated fats with a lack of physical activity ends up causing prediabetes almost every time. So with that insulin resistance factor, poor blood work, tax on organs, and hormonal effects, we're getting some really nasty, and there are several other effects that I haven't mentioned, that the actual carrying of excess fat tissue starts to impact body processes to a negative. And that's a problem. So we're going to have to do something about it. Now, that sounds pretty scary, but there's a real big caveat to that. All of these are long-term, what we call summative effects, which means that if you spend one day magical, genie comes down to earth, I was going to say, comes out of a lamp, and he's like, you got 3 wishes. You're like, all right. All the money in the world. He's like, done. You're like, superpowers, immortality, etc. He's like, on it. And you're like, I want to be super over fat for one day, just to see what it feels like. And he's like, well, you could have just done that by eating cookies. No, just make me fat. He's like, all right, well, so now you're super rich, immortal, all-powerful, and super fat for a day. How much would being super duper fat for a day actually affect your health? The answer is almost not at all. It's a tiny effect. It's one day. Now, if you were over fat, over those 25-35% levels for males and females respectively, for a week, how much would that affect your health? Well, a little bit. What about for a month? More. What about for a year? Now we're talking. Now that's going to cause some arguably irreparable damage to organs and to blood work mediated physiological systems. What about for years? What about for decades? That's the American obesity epidemic. That's what's reducing life expectancy by 10, 15, 20 years across the nation for those groups that are affected. So if a body fat test shows that you in fact have excess body fat and you could benefit from losing it, it's a long-term process. So thinking about, oh my God, I have to lose all of this in 3 months is disastrous. Because rushing into fixing that big of a problem usually doesn't work. And there are studies to confirm that. 95% of all fat loss dieters fail and rebound back to their old weight. So the reality of the matter is, because it is a summative process, yes, being over fat is not good for your health, but you're not killing yourself at some kind of rapid pace. To juxtapose this with other medical problems, if you get diagnosed with malignant cancer, God forbid, it's not like, okay, well, I'll schedule an appointment with an oncologist later in the week, and I'll probably go when the month clears up because it's a busy day at work. Are you out of your mind? You better act now. Right? Days are ticking. Every day that cancer is in your body is a day it spreads to more organs, is a day closer to your imminent death if you don't do something about it with advanced chemical, radiological, and everything other kind of treatment. And if you hit it fast and you hit it hard, there's a good chance now with many cancers that you're going to be completely cancer-free after a couple of months, and you'll be well on your way to a long and happy life. Then timing is of the essence. Immediate action is of the essence. Because cancer kills you real quick, especially when it's a malignant stage. But for high body fat levels, it's the kind of situation that in order to fix the problem, it takes time. But the problem itself isn't super dangerous at any one time. It's a slowly compounding situation, right? So if you find yourself, it's kind of like money. If you find your budget to be off and you're in a financial position in which you're losing some money, but you have a lot saved up, you could lose money for years and years and still have enough to live on. So do you need to go rob the bank or a get-rich-quick scheme or something like that? No, what you need is a good actionable strategy to increase your income. Maybe something like taking a couple courses at college, getting a new certification, upping your level of commitment to your career, looking for a new job. That kind of stuff takes months. It might take years. But once you have done it, you've reversed course. Now you're fixing the problem in a way that's sustainable in the long term. You get a realtor's license, you start making $200,000 a year. Your money problems are solved kind of ad infinitum because of the fact that you took a long time, months or whatever, to study up, get familiar with the industry, and do what it takes. Very similar thing with body fat. So please don't let this video be one of these things that you watch and go, oh my God, I'm over the body fat limit. Let's do Beachbody Super Extreme Hardcore ZFX 3000 supplement with 3 added testosterone esters. 2 just wasn't enough. I need to fix this right now. You don't need to fix it right now. But what you can do is calmly address the situation, follow a sustainable fat loss diet with planned breaks every couple of months to let your body heal from the metabolic disruption, from the psychological disruption, to let the set point reset so you can slowly ratchet down. And eventually, within several months or several years, depending on how much body fat you're carrying, you're below those top end limits and you're golden and you can prioritize other things. How do you make that sustainable stuff? Well, half the services at Renaissance are designed for you just to do that, including our coaching and our templates. But nothing we promise works overnight. So if you have these high body fat levels that I'm talking about, don't you freak out, because freaking out just increases your cortisol and makes you even fatter. So anytime the situation occurs that you find out that you're above whatever levels of body fat that you need, then you can rectify it slowly and surely, and don't be alarmed. It's not something that you have to fix now, but you can calmly start to work at it through normal steps. So we definitely have these high ranges, and we're not going to say we want to steer clear of them, but if we're on the plus side of those ranges, body fat reduction is probably a very high priority for health, certainly one of them. Now, what does that mean? So we're going to have low values in a second. So it's between these low values and high values that best health is found. But what does that look like? Well, if a male gets leaner than 25%, on average he gets healthier for a while. 20% body fat for males, on average, all things being equal, is significantly healthier than 25%. Not much like it is between 30 and 25. But 15% body fat is quite a bit healthier than 20%, but nothing to write home about. 10% body fat and 15%, is really small differences in health. And 5% fat and 10% fat between males is probably of roughly equivalent health. And we'll get into exactly why that is for most situations. For females, a female of 30% fat is probably going to be healthier a bit than a female of 35% on average. 25% is a bit healthier, 20% a little bit healthier. Between 15 and 20, it's roughly equivalent. So it's one of those situations where it's kind of good news. If you're below the 25 and 35% respectively for males and females, especially if you're like 5% below, so if you want a target to shoot for, I know people always like this and it's very difficult to say, but if you just want that target, 20% for men and 25% for women, and also I guess between 15 and 20% for men, and between 25% and 30% for women, much lower than that, it just doesn't yield the kind of health effects that are going to be anything to write home about, and other priorities in your diet and your training yield bigger health effects now. So to put it this way, if you're below 25%, you're good to go, but you could probably still get leaner and still get healthier. If you're below 20% already as a male, and you're below 25% as a female, the health yield just isn't worth it. And we get into the situation where medical professionals at this point start to see if people are really coming from a true health perspective on their body fat levels, or if they're starting to enter into some confusion between health and body composition goals, aesthetic goals, and sometimes disordered body image. If an individual is coming down, let's say it's a female coming from 35% on her way down to 25%, and she says, listen, doc, I'm doing this for my health, that's not only believable, it's encourageable, and just fine. If at 25% the same female is saying, look, I want to get to 20% because it's healthier, the medical professional probably has about a neutral opinion on that. Like, well, okay, that's cool. It'll probably make you a bit healthier, but make sure, you're keeping the rest of your life in balance and attending to other health concerns. Once a female starts to drop below 20% body fat and trend towards 15%, if she's saying that it's for her health, that's almost certainly just not true, fundamentally. I'll put it to you this way. It's like saying working on your deadlift if you're a female up to 225 pounds or about 100 kilos will make you more functional in most sport, most fitness, and most daily life, especially daily life. How much more functional will you become in daily life if you deadlift 275, if you deadlift 315, if you do 365? Not at all? Almost not at all? Maybe less functional because you're carrying around more muscle mass now and you get more tired? So if a female tells a doctor, listen, I need to lift because I need to get to about 225 and the deadlift to really be able to pick up my groceries, take care of my kids, blah, 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 a good, well-trained medical professional, maybe somebody like Trevor Fentner at RP, or one of our friends, Spencer Nadolski, is a big fitness doctor. Crystal Guevara, some individuals that are medical doctors that are very well affiliated with lifting and understand how beneficial it is. If you tell them, and you're a female, look, I want to deadlift 225 for my health, they'll be all thumbs up for it. If you are already at 275 in the deadlift as a female, and you say, listen, I got to get to 315, I know my blood work's a little funky, but I got to do what it takes in order to get healthier, and I want to be able to have more quality of life. Above 275 to 315, they can literally tell you that you're not going to get any more quality of life out of that. You might actually get less. So similar analogy there with the body fats, that once females trend below 20 and once males trend much below 10%, there's really just not an argument there for health. If it's an aesthetic argument, that's fine, but it's very important to know which one it is so that you're not lying to yourself and lying to others. You're very clear on what it is you're doing and why. Now, so we're pretty clear on a couple things. Below 25% for males, below 35% for females. Fundamentally, good healthy body fat levels. A bit lower than that's probably somewhere where the optimal is. Under 15% for males, under 25% for females is really not much of an argument from health for getting any leaner. Now, what's too low? So let's start with males. Through a variety of channels, including YouTube troll commentators and individuals that are looking at muscular physiques, maybe in a muscle magazine for the first time, that are unacquainted with physique sport, we get a lot of this, well, that can't be healthy, or that's not healthy, or sometimes the more charitable, that's not healthy, right? And they actually seek your confirmation, but that's pretty rare. Usually they'll just tell you it's not healthy. A fun intellectual game to play, if you are jovial about it and not too mean, is to say, oh, interesting, why do you think so? And usually you get some kind of recourse to the idea, well, that can't be healthy. I mean, you need body fat. And you go, okay, well, you need it for what? And well starts to run dry in actual ideas. So I'm going to say something that's relatively controversial only because it hasn't been exposed much to general thought. Fundamentally, up until you get into the low single digits, 2-3%, there is not an unhealthy body fat level for men. For males that are past the developmental stages, adult males, you can hypothetically be at 4% body fat indefinitely and be very, very healthy as you could be. Past 4% or so, there is nothing you gain health-wise from having more fat, seemingly. Now, that is a huge thing to say, and it's true, but it comes with several caveats. People will say that there's such a thing as too lean for males. There's a grain of truth to that. The reality is that it's not that being too lean is unhealthy. Largely isn't. The reality is that the things it takes to get that lean and stay that lean, the manipulations themselves, might not be healthy. So it's not the being there, it's the getting there. That's the problem, right? Kind of an analogy to that is once you launch a spacecraft into orbit, and the spacecraft is orbital, the percent chance of something going wrong once the space shuttle, for example, is actually orbiting the Earth is actually really low. It's really safe up there. There's damn near nothing in space. All the instruments and everything have been sealed very well. And fundamentally, you're not at very high risk. And the astronauts that you see, filming themselves, eating foods and bubbles and of orange juice and stuff, they don't seem very worried, and they shouldn't be. Because fundamentally, being up in space is not very dangerous. Getting to space is very dangerous. The rocket launch sequence, I don't have to remind you of the many disasters. That's scary, and it damn well should be because the risk is very high. You are riding a gigantic, permanently exploding or 10-minute bomb explosion all the way up. Getting to space is dangerous. Being in space, not so much. Similarly, the things it takes to get to and sometimes to sustain that low body fat percentage are the things that end up being unhealthy. So it's very, very clear that we make this distinction. It's not the low body fat themselves. It's what we're doing to get there. And I'll have an example of what that difference is in just a bit. What are the risk factors? Well, a lot of people, to lower their calories to those levels to get those body fats, end up eating less than the minimum number of healthy fats, essential fats your body can't make per day. That will degrade health. Sometimes they eat less or end up processing too much and not integrating enough proteins, and that ends up being under the minimum protein dose, and that's unhealthy. A lot of times it's the lack of consumption of vegetables, fruits, and whole grains to get that lean through the carbohydrate reduction that it takes that you end up missing out on vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, and fiber, which are critical to get in certain amounts and mostly come from fruits and veggies. In addition to that, the fatigue levels required from the brutal training and the brutally hypocaloric, or in the short term, hypocaloric, eventually isocaloric diet that was required, the fatigue levels required to potentially train that much to keep the body fat that low are unsustainable. They are themselves unhealthy. It's too much fatigue for too long. Those are the things that get you in trouble. It's the rocket fuel, it's the launch that gets you in trouble. It's not the low body fat itself. How do we know this, first of all, to be the case? And second of all, what's a good real-world example? There are athletic individuals with good genetics that train plenty, but they eat plenty, and they're healthy as can be, even though they have incredibly low body fat. A lot of individuals come to mind. James Townsend, one of the grind and juggernaut athletes, a gentleman that is an RP client, comes to mind. He's a former NFL football player and now a very, very successful CrossFit Games competitor, and he competes in a lot of weightlifting now as well. He eats a fundamentally very healthy diet with plenty of food. He works out a lot, but not unsustainably. He has single-digit body fat levels all the time, just genetically. He just walks around like that. Are you really going to look at him and say, listen, the doctors talked it over. You need to gain fat to be healthier? The answer is almost certainly not. There are a bunch of individuals that are genetically lean. A lot of endurance athletes, for example, with their combination of sustainable training yet good nutrition, that are very low body fat, 5%, 4%, and they're as healthy as can be. So it's not the percent we have to worry about. It's what it takes to get there. Now, if you're 4%, you're telling everyone you're as healthy as can be, but you more or less have to starve to get there. You're not getting nearly enough of the micronutrients that we talked about, and your fatigue levels are outlandish. Your health will suffer. It will absolutely suffer. Not an incredible amount, but again, that's slow and steady degradation of health. So for males, what's the healthiest body fat? The lowest one at which you can sustainably perform. Eat a very well-balanced diet. For most individuals, 10 to 15% is where that at. Below 10%, usually it's a temporary thing to try to push some kind of exotic body composition or lifting goal. After you're done with that, coming back up to about 10% is probably good for sustainability. So it's not the body fat itself, it's what it takes to get there. For females, it's a different story. In the short term, months and weeks, there is really no big downside for a very low body fat percent in females. As a matter of fact, if you look at the body fats of modern female physique competitors, they're oftentimes in the single digits. And these girls have striated glutes and everything. They're not unhealthy people. What it takes to get there, same idea as with men. If you sustain a low body fat and you're just dieting all the time and super chronically fatigued and under eating micronutrient-rich foods, yes, you'll pay that price as well as a female. But for the long term, so for the short term, it's fine other than that same constraint as males. For the long term, there's another constraint. Below about 15% body fat on average, you get the development of amenorrhea, lack of menstrual cycle in females of reproductive age. At that point, through a variety of mechanisms, bone loss, usually estrogen-mediated bone loss, starts to occur. That can eventually cause osteopenia, bone loss through age, and osteoporosis, the very, very harsh development of bone loss that is medically significant later in the later years. Now, it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen over 5 years, but it happens after that. So females, 15% is usually that average cutoff. Now, the cool thing is, because of how most females store body fat, anything below 18% is going to be stripped up six-pack for most girls. So you can walk around 16%, still have normal periods, and have a rockin' killer body with all kinds of definition. If for a physique show or a CrossFit competition or something you want to, or just for yourself, want to push that over the period of a couple of months to below 15%, kudos to you, you'll do no real long-term damage. But if you want to live at 10%, or something like that, or below, you're going to be causing long-term damage, especially to bone health. So our biggest advice for females is the lowest you should ever push it is about 15% for sustainability. If you want to push below that every now and again, great. Why do I have to say this? A lot of females come to Renaissance as potential clients and say, I got my body fat down, I'm 16% fat, I want to get down to 10%. And we ask why. There's no physique show. There's not even any goals of I want to take pictures and look really cool for vacation. They're like, I just want to be at 10% and I think like that's excess fat and I could perform better and I just be happier and healthier. False. Demonstrably false. So females, if you are chronically above or chronically below 15%, you have normal menstrual cycles, you have nothing to worry about. But if as you inch towards the 15%, you start getting spotty periods or none at all, you have to stay higher than that for long-term reproductive and bone health as well. And cardiovascular health, in addition to that, a myriad of other factors. So females, 15% and lower, short-term only. 15 to 20, 25, 30% is where you want to be most of the time for your best health. So to sum this up, remember, it's all a spectrum conversation. Is there such a thing as too fat to be healthy? No, but there is such a thing as much fatter than this number, and you're looking at health being degraded more than it should be. In addition, for males and females, sustainably being healthy usually is something around 10% to 15% for males and 15 to 20% for females. There are big margins above that are just fine, but those are the lowest values you shoot for. Folks, hopefully learn something. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you next time.